You know, a photographer, we try anything. You never know.
Hi there. Alex Webb became recognized as a significant innovator within the photography world with the release of his two books on Haiti and the tropics, Hot Light, Half Worlds, as well as Under a Grudging Sun. When Webb began photographing Haiti in the late 1970s, serious photojournalism was still dominated by black and white photographs. But working in this environment, Webb found that using his old practice of monochrome failed to communicate the vibrancy and emotional turmoil that he was witnessing. With color, his palette became vivid, saturated, and energetic, reflecting Haiti's tropical heat and social volatility. He didn't approach this shift to color in a subtle manner. It was radical and revolutionary. Through his pictures, one began to feel the chaos of the street. He said color is both seductive and treacherous. He felt that he was able to capture a complex truth about the country because it was a place of beauty and spirituality combined with political instability and everyday survival. Color became a psychological tool. He saw the reds, yellows, and blues as acting as visual stress points, conveying life, danger, and sometimes even feelings of elation. He was using Kodachrome film for its saturated colors because he didn't want to just report on the situations and events that he was witnessing. Rather, he wanted to convey the full emotional force of what it felt like to be there. These images, published in Under a Grudging Sun, were groundbreaking. They shifted color documentary photography into a realm that was simultaneously serious and lyrical. He's got a natural ability to pull together unrelated elements and build a frame that has form as well as beauty. I produced an earlier video breaking down the structure of this image, and a few people couldn't believe that the photograph hadn't been painstakingly staged. I'll leave a link in the description.
I don't direct anyone. I mean, I let things, and for me, it would make sort of a mockery of what it is that excites me about photography, because one of the things that excites me about photographs is that, at least this kind of photograph, is that you can say it happened. And it is on some level a moment in history. You really can't say that about the other arts. You can't say that about a painting. Painting is simply the creation of the imagination of the painter.
His success stems from his ability to anticipate how multiple factors have the potential to unify within the frame to produce powerful compositions. And remember that, especially in a place like Haiti, one has to watch one's back. There's real danger associated with working in such a volatile environment.
As a photographer, I'm always looking for more elements that qualify or transform the image. I think I've always been drawn to visually complex photographs. Many of my early photographs contain more than one element, have more than one point of focus, and as the years have passed, they've become even more complex. These days, I often feel as if I'm walking a fragile line visually, pushing the frame to include more and more, just up to, but falling short of chaos. I'm not talking about complexity for complexity's sake. I take complex pictures because the world I experience is a complicated and ultimately inexplicable place.
His images also offer us a masterclass in the practice of layering. He pulls together multiple subjects from the foreground and background, compressing them into the two-dimensional plane. Complex stories and competing narratives are being presented through sometimes 3 or more planes of action. This complexity mirrors the sensory overload of street life in Haiti.
It's really almost like I smell the possibility of a picture. And sometimes it may just be a shaft of light, and sometimes it's something that someone is doing, or it's something or other about the construction of the whole frame. But I mean, every time it's different. But I mean, I feel like I'm working on multiple layers simultaneously. Obviously, there is the so-called subject of whatever it is that's going on. And there's the quality of light, there's the mood, there's the color. And all these things have to sort of orchestrate together to make it all finally work.
He described photographing in the country as walking on the edge of chaos. The tension between the contradictory elements suggests how fast life can shift from order to disorder. At the time that he was doing this work, most news and journalistic images were produced as neatly packaged sets of information that could be easily interpreted. But Webb's fragmented visuals offer beauty with ambiguity. He also wasn't operating as a parachute journalist. He spent over 30 years covering the evolution of the country. In his work, he incorporated deep, dark shadows that emphasize the constant presence of discord and danger. And he also drew on the symbolism associated with the population's rich spiritual traditions. By the early 2000s, a subtle shift emerged in his work. In Istanbul's City of 100 Names and The Suffering of Light, his images grew quieter and more spacious.
When you start out, say in photography, or probably any profession, the leaps forward are much greater. Your discoveries are larger. And as you work more and more and more, the discoveries get smaller and smaller and smaller. You want to make sure, though, that you're still discovering.
Shadows, as well as frames within frames, still appear in his work, but now they evoke ideas of memory and mystery rather than tension. You can see that he's drawing on the same aesthetic ideas that he established in Haiti, but the sense of foreboding and threat has dissipated. He shows us that Istanbul is a city suspended between past and present, and also between tradition and modernity. He's trading in the political spaces for those that are more psychological and inward-looking. So instead of producing a social commentary, he's become more interested in the human experience.
I think the process of photographing a place and photographing the streets is also, it's a process of trying to understand, both to understand the world around you and to understand the self, myself. So it's this sort of relationship between the two that goes back and forth.
He also began to shift his palette away from the dramatic, saturated colors of the tropics, favoring more subtle color combinations. Webb talks about the necessity and difficulty of shifting from film to digital.
Well, the process of starting to photograph digitally was a difficult one for me. One of the things is I'm a working photographer, and to continue working as a photographer, I needed to start doing digital. Digital files tend to be thinner. They tend to have less depth, less texture than film. Now, working with my printer, we do some things to the files to try and give the prints a greater sense of depth.
I've certainly struggled with it. I mean, if Kodachrome was still being produced, and the few publications that still hire photographers were willing to deal with film, I probably wouldn't work digitally at all.
A more profound turning point came as Webb began collaborating with his wife, Rebecca. When they met in the early 1990s, they came from very different creative worlds. From now on, I'm going to refer to him as Alex, because otherwise commenting on the two Webbs is going to become confusing. Alex was already an established magnum photographer rooted in the tradition of street and documentary photography, while Rebecca started out as a poet and then turned to photography. While his photographs were structurally complex and demanded attention, hers were quieter and lyrical. Their photographic partnership began with Violet Isle. It can be viewed as a portrait of Cuba. Alex's images showed the pulse of public life, markets, processions, and the confusion of streets, while Rebecca remained on the margins of life, seeking out more private, poetic moments.
No, I do think that photography does have, of course, because of its very nature, this very special relationship with time, both the specific moment, say in the street, but also historical time.
I think that photography has a very special relationship with memory, from the personal snapshot that we all have with our personal histories, but also there is the sense of the memorial in it. And perhaps it's the poet in me, but there's just something about photography, the photo book especially. I love that paradox of being able to hold in one's hands a series of intangible moments.
The result is an interesting visual duet. The fusion of pictures initiates a sort of call and response between outward seeing and inward feeling. They photographed separately but wove their images together through the sequencing of the book. I can't be 100% sure, but I think at this early stage of their collaboration, one can fairly easily identify whose pictures belong to whom. I can imagine that there was a lot of negotiation between them as they shaped their working relationship. It's not an easy thing to pull off. They needed to find a way of maintaining their individual creativity while building something together.
Well, I think the reason our collaborations work, because I think it is complicated when you think about a married couple doing an artistic collaboration. I think the reason they work is because it emerged organically. When we first got together, we really never considered the possibility of collaboration. We really thought that would be, might be the end of the marriage. But in 2008, after working some 15 years individually on two separate projects in Cuba, we somehow hit on the notion of bringing the two bodies of work together. And as we began interweaving the photographs from the two projects, we realized that they spoke together to one another in new, interesting ways. We realized that in bringing the work together, we were able to create a more multi-layered portrait of the island of Cuba than if we just relied on one or another of our individual projects. But I think it's important to realize that our collaborations happen in the editing, selecting process, not in the street. We do not photograph together, and that is important to realize.
In their fifth collaborative work, the themes seem to belong to both of them. Their photographic domains seem to have merged. Alex's once busy and charged compositions become quieter and more melancholic. Brooklyn, the city within, is a very personal reflection on the place they've both called home for decades. They would often photograph in the same place, but still separately, each following their own instincts. When it comes to editing, I'm sure they have to be especially careful, only allowing their adults in the room. They look for resonances rather than similarities, factors like color echoes, emotional parallels, or formal counterpoints. Their process is probably similar to band members working together on a musical composition. They're trying to create harmony as they integrate their individual voices. I hope you enjoyed their work, and I'll see you next time.
And we do our edits of any of these projects over a significant amount of time. Usually it's at least 6 months. we come up with our, if we're working on a collaborative project, we come up with our respective edits, and we give each other our opinions about each of us. But the rule in the house, of course, is the artist has the final say. It's a little more complicated when you have two artists arguing over the same pictures. So, but if we wait and leave the stuff up on the walls, the studio, for a while, we very often come to agreement. It's interesting how that happens.